Today, when you come into Alfred's cabin, one of the first things that I think you notice is what a small space this is, and even what a dark space this is. As you can see, there's clearly no overhead lighting of any sort. The furnishings in some ways feel expected, very service-oriented, very plain, nothing too fancy. Till we get to this bed. As you take a look at it, you might be thinking to yourself, this is not what I expected of enslaved housing at the Hermitage. You know, it's a nice bed. It looks like a comfortable sleep. It's certainly attractive and lovely. You've got this beautiful clock back here on the table as well. A rocking chair, a table with those lovely turned legs. And over time, one of our concerns at the Hermitage is that people will somehow interpret this setting to think, well, maybe slavery at the Hermitage wasn't such a bad place to be. Maybe it wasn't the worst condition in which you could find yourself. So I want to make sure from the beginning that you understand that that is a false idea, and then explain why it is that the cabin looks this way. Before emancipation and before the Civil War, we're not completely sure where Alfred would have lived on the property. We don't know anything about his housing or his home environment. He was the son of Betty, who was the enslaved cook. We know that enslaved people generally slept where they worked, so perhaps Alfred lived nearer the house or closer to the kitchen. Perhaps he lived in a different building altogether. We're not completely sure. What we can say for certain is that Alfred lived in this cabin at some point after 1865. After the Civil War came through Nashville, after the emancipation of the enslaved people by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, many enslaved people had to make radical decisions, whether to stay in their known environments. Did they stay on the plantations where they had been working? Did they continue working for the families that had enslaved them? Did they continue living in the same structures? Plantation owners were making those same decisions as well, deciding how many of their formerly enslaved people they could now hire to work for them. Alfred Jackson and his wife Gracie are one of those examples of a family who chose to remain at the plantation after emancipation. And this is where they lived. Andrew Jr., Andrew Jackson's son and heir, had sold the property to the state of Tennessee in 1856 in order to bring some additional income into what was a very quickly failing business endeavor here at the Hermitage. But after Andrew Jr.'s death in 1865, the family continued to struggle with their finances. Beginning in 1867, the family was then forced to begin parting with personal possessions. And this is where Alfred comes into the story in a really big way. Alfred stepped up as one of the first purchasers of the Jacksons' possessions. And he purchased at least 3 things, perhaps 4, that we know of, that are reflected here in this cabin. First of all, we know that Alfred purchased a 4-poster bed, not the one you see today, but the 4-poster bed in which he believed Andrew Jackson died in 1845. And that bed is nearly 8 feet tall, so you can imagine how much work it would take to narrow it down so that you could fit it into this large cabin, this low-ceilinged cabin space here. We know that he also purchased a clock from the family. We know that he also purchased a mirror and a ceramic water cooler. So think of a very lovely igloo at a soccer game. So think about that.